All right, we're back. It is COMP1004, Rapid Application Development, and it's the fall 2016 semester at Georgian. And we're going to kind of move ahead a little bit more today than normal. I'd like to invite you to do more of a demo than the PowerPoint today. So I haven't really included a PowerPoint because I'm moving on. I want to set up a database. It's going to be a local database, right? Because some of you don't have Azure, or you can't get Azure, or it's a pain in the ass, whatever. So we'll look at a database because I want to cover databases early, because when we get to assignment 4, I want to kind of give you the option as a bonus to do, or even assignment 3. So let's say assignment 3, I think it's due what, tomorrow, right? Who wants to push themselves and include it as as a data source, as a database, as opposed to a flat file or something like that, or data that's inside of a list file. We can do that. We can do that with by using a database, but we have to set that all up. So let's open up a new project. We'll do it locally first, and we'll talk about how to do this. Yes. If I'm not wrong, it should say, does it? Okay, then it's November 11th. Whatever it says, right? If it's on the Blackboard, it says November 11th, then it's November 11th. Whatever it says on Blackboard. I'm not going to change it now, right? I thought it was due. We were just talking about it. You said it was due. Blackboard is the way we go, so it's due tomorrow. Did you not work on it yet? Yeah. Peter, I think we talked about this, right? All right, so what do people want to do? All right, because that's confusing. That doesn't make any sense to me. If it's a mistake, it's my mistake then, obviously, right? So I'll eat it. I have no problem. We'll make it due next week, okay? Nice and easy. So that way it's not going to make anyone suffer. So if you worked on it, great. Hand it in and it's done. You don't have to worry about it anymore. If you haven't touched it, then it'll be due next week. So I'll update the timeline on Blackboard. Okay. All right, let's go into, let me just do this part now before I forget, because we're going to do this and then it's going to lock down and then, it's not good. So let's see what we did here. It was due, assignment 3, yeah, it was due. Okay, so it even says here Friday, November the 11th. So both those places, so that means must have been a mistake. It's fine, don't worry about it. Gabe, I didn't think you were going to come today. I thought you're avoiding me. Yeah. And that's released. Look at that. Display after. So we're not going to do this. And we'll make this one due 11th. We'll bring 14th. Close it up. All right. So you'll have until a couple days later. Worst case if you're late or something like that to hand it in. So it'll be due next week. Okay. So it's been updated now on Blackboard. You should see an update. That makes it up. Should make it easy for everybody. Okay. Move on to the next part. So assignment 3, not due this week, due next week, November the 11th on Friday. All right, so we're starting off a new application, and I'm looking at Visual C#, going to Windows, and I'm clicking on, like we did before, my Windows Form application. And I'm going to go COMP1004, fall 2016, and it's going to be lesson 8. And I want to use this lesson a little bit for database. I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. Because without that, some of the stuff we're going to be doing, like with no database, it's hard to kind of get data into our application, except for with a flat file or some kind of data that's inside the application, which is kind of boring, right? And 99% of applications I've ever done, they've always been with data, right? So we should talk about how to do that. I'm also going to use the entity framework because that's the most popular framework to use. So I'm just going to kick it off here. I'm opening up a Git repository as well. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to be talking about Link a little bit today, and then we'll revisit Link a little bit next week as we move towards object-oriented programming and with databases. So today, I want to introduce databases to you and how we do it. I don't expect you guys to use everything exactly this way, but we'll talk about almost like a kind of a high level, how do we do stuff. First thing, we have no database. So before I have a form, before I do anything with the form, I need some kind of data, right? So now that I've got my application open and I got nothing here, I need to be able to do something with the database. Now, on Visual Studio 2015. If you've got Visual Studio 2015, hopefully you've got Enterprise. Everybody got Enterprise? Anyone not have Enterprise? So you might have a bit of an issue. But if you've got Enterprise, what you can do is if you go to SQL Server Object Explorer, right? Now I've got it in a little window here. To get that, you go to View, SQL Server Object Explorer, which is Control plus backslash, and then Control plus S. So that control sequence. Visual Studio has this really funny, double shortcut key kind of thing to get stuff, which is really neat and weird. But this is where you get it from. So SQL Server Object Explorer, you go to View, and then go here, and then it should appear on the left-hand side. Right now, this is after your project has launched. On the left, you'll see a database. Most likely, for most of you, you won't see this stuff. Most likely, what you'll see is just this, right? Which is local DB, MS local, local DB, this one. This local DB, this local database, it actually is a SQL Express that comes with Visual Studio 2015, right? Does anyone not have this? I'm looking at the guy who doesn't have Enterprise. You're okay with this? Good. Okay, so if you've got this, this is where we can establish a database for our application, right? Now, there's two ways we can do that, yeah. Well, let's do locally for now. So again, go. Sorry? You don't have the SQL server here at all? So the way to get that, yes. You want to go with the one that says local DB / MS SQL local DB, that one. All right? So we're all together. So if you don't have that, you can always find it. You can always go add SQL server, right? And if you notice, if I go local, try this out, right? If you go local, you will also list a bunch of stuff here that you might have. So if you don't have it, you can go here and pick MS SQL local DB. Okay, those are the two ways. If it's not listed here, you can always go to this plus little button, this icon, which will bring up the local DB. Okay, what is a local DB before we go further? All right, so again, we have a little server, SQLite, that's what it is. SQL Express Lite is what it is. And it's running in the background with Visual Studio 2015. As soon as Visual Studio 2015 gets installed on your machine, you got a server. And that's why Microsoft, when you're as a developer, it really bogs down your machine because it's running in the background as a service. Okay, it's not something you have to launch or access or whatever. I'm just putting it out there for you so you know. Number one. Two, whenever we access this thing, we have a bunch of databases. Every time I launch a project with a database, it includes it here. Right? So the server can have multiple databases. Even if you delete the project, it'll still keep the database, right? Unless you explicitly go in there and delete it, right? So that's fine. We're going to make our own. So to do your own database, again, I'm looking at this local DB, and we have to remember this path because the brackets are really important, actually. So if you look at the brackets, which is like open bracket, local DB, close bracket, and then kind of backslash MS SQL local DB, and exactly this. Right, that's what it looks like. Again, if you can't remember it, click this, go to local, and then click this, and that's the actual connection string right there. So one is, it's installed. Second is like install with Visual Studio. Second part is that when we connect to the local DB, there's no password required or username. It's using your Windows authentication to access your database, right? So I'm just reviewing for people who don't know. Some people know this, some people don't, right? So when you're accessing the local database, you can get on there and create databases and or the database server, create databases, create tables, all that stuff without any username or password. Okay, we do this for testing purposes. In the real world, when we connect to something like Azure, then we'd have to have a different form of authentication with username and password, right? But for us, we're just using it as a data source. Okay, number one. Two, I want to make a database. How do I do that? So I'm going to right-click on the databases folder here, and I want to click Add New Database, right? So my new database is going to appear here. And again, if you notice, this is the database location, C:\users, Tom, in my case, app data. So it's going to be in a hidden folder of my system, local, Microsoft SQL local server, right? Instances of MS SQL local DB. right? So that's where it actually physically is. Yes. Windows Server authentication. Okay, we always use Windows Server because Windows Server authentication is no authentication. As long as you're logged in, you're in. Yes. Yeah, you can repoint it. I'll show you that later on. Sorry? Yes, you can do that too. We'll do it both ways. We'll do both of those. I'll talk about this now. So I'm starting to prepare you guys for database later on. It takes a couple steps. So we'll do both. This is the way we do it with my database. I have to have a server. Even if I have a database file in my actual application here, it still has to be on the server. So first I'm going to go directly to the server. It's kind of backwards this way, but I like it more. So database name, you specify the database name. I'm going to specify COMP1004. You can specify whatever you like. Right? I'm going to click OK. So what this is going to do, it's going to create the database. And if I scroll down now, there it is, right? COMP1004. But the database is housed on the database server, file path, or whatever you want to call it, right? So there's my database. My database is empty, right? It has no tables right now. If I actually look into it, there's some system tables. But other than that, the database comes empty. So if you've been doing database with, who are you doing database with now, this semester? Darcy? Did you guys go over this stuff at all? Okay, so I'm just reviewing. So then you have your tables, and we want to create some tables. We want to create some tables for testing. Let's make a students table, right? So we're going to right-click on table, add new table. Now, it's going to pull up, if you have Visual Studio 2015 Enterprise version, or some other version, Professional does this as well, you'll be able to go in here and set up a design. There's going to be a design form that comes up that allows me to design my database table. Okay? This is great prep for you guys if you're doing ASP.NET with COMP1007 in the summer. Right? When we do that, we do almost the exact same thing. Okay? For that, though, we really need you to get Azure. I know there's a bit of an issue with Azure and Microsoft Imagine nowadays. Sign that up. Okay, so ID is the ID of the table right now. I want to make this so that it's the student ID. I want to rename this to student ID. Right, like that. And then I want to kind of do kind of like first name and then last name. Right, so here's my first name. We'll go back here and fix all these in a second. I'm just architecting here. So first name, last name, my student ID, kind of thing is what I want to use. And I don't know, what else do you want to add in? I mean, this is just some examples of potentially a student. How about what do we put in? Well, no, I'm thinking date of birth might be challenging. Major, sure, I like that. Or a program, we'll call it program. Right? Okay, so now by default, it gives me an integer for student ID. Notice that there's a little key next to it. That's the primary key, right, by default. I've got ncar 10. I want to go to nvarchar 50, right, for both of these. So change those, please. Now you can use whatever you like. Here, I'm just using nvarchar 50 because it gives me more room, right? Same thing with program. I'm going to go, just in case I want to have a long program name, nvarchar 50. And maybe what I want to have is a program description, something like that for now. Program description. This is not accurate. Maybe I would have my program as a foreign key, and then I could maybe multiple programs, and then my program description would be related to my foreign key. But for now, let's make this, so this just for this example, nvarchar max. Notice that there's allow nulls on this side here. Allow nulls means I can leave them empty. I don't want to allow my first name and last name to be empty. That doesn't make any sense for me. My program and program description, maybe my program can't be allowed empty, but my program description can be allowed to be empty. We'll leave one empty, like that, right? So if you notice here, after the designer on the T-SQL script down here, it actually has the script you need to create the table. Now my table is called table, which is pretty ugly. So let's rename that to students. Right? The other thing I want to do is on the student itself, if I click on there, I'm just going to dull this down for a second. And I'm going to bring back up my properties on the right. So I'm clicking on student, and on the right-hand side here, I've got student ID and blah, blah. But one of the things I want to change is my identity specification. I want to move from false, which basically says that this key is going to be auto-incrementing. That's what it is. So again, if forgive me if it's a review, I'm just going over stuff as if you've never seen it before to fill in some of the gaps for some people. All right? So I've created, yes? Properties? Yeah. If I click on student ID, it's contextual, so it'll actually bring up this. You can also type it in manually, by the way. If anything that you see here under the table, I can physically type this in, and then it'll create the design for me as well. So you can do it both ways. Okay? Now this is very high level. We're just using the data from the database we're going to create in a second, yes? Well, we'll have to go in there and check that out in a bit. So give me a second. But this is, try and do it this way. So try and change this stuff, Gabriel. Right? And don't worry about what it is up here. Just make sure that as long as this part is correct, that's the most important thing. Okay, next. Are we all together on this one for the most part? Anyone not, other than Gabriel, anyone else not be able to do this for some reason? Okay, cool. So now there's two options. Update, right, is what I want. I can also, if I save this file, this is actually a query that I'm going to be doing, right? A script that I'm going to be using to access the database, right? So if I click on update, right, it's going to bring up this database, preview database updates that comes up, a little window, right? And there's two things. I can generate a script that I can save later on, right? Which is neat. Or update the database, which is what I want to do. So click update database. And what it'll do is, as it goes through, you'll see that it says update completed successfully. If you don't see that message, something's wrong. It means you've typed something wrong or you modified something wrong. So you should see this. Okay, that's good. I'm going to close this thing down, right? Because I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to just minimize or minify that one. And on the left, I want to go back to my SQL Server Object Explorer just to see what I got, to see that I got the same thing. So on the left-hand side now, I'm on tables, I'm opening it up, and I see dbo.students. DBO is the method or the type of table that it is, DBO type table, a newer type, right? And if I open it up now, you can see that I can look at the columns and everything else in there. It actually gives you a description of the columns, all in Visual Studio, which is kind of cool, right? Now, the better tool to use is SQL Server Management Studio, right? And you can get that free from on the Hub or DreamSpark, right? And I'll show you how to do that in a sec. But let's take a look at this. So I got my students, and there's nothing in there. I don't have any data right now. All I have is an empty container table. That's what I have. So let's add a few pieces of data. How do I do that? So right-click on students, and I'm going to go View Data. Okay. And once I click on there, it'll bring up this on the right-hand side, right? And I'm not going to touch my student ID because that's auto-incrementing, right? But my first name, I'm going to type in some stuff like, maybe my name, Tom, and my program, which is, Comp Computer Science. I'm going to leave my program description empty and go to the next one. So there's one student. You can do some of your own, John Smith, make him computer science as well. Notice that typically I would want to do a pull down here as opposed to all the other stuff. And let's say we'll call it Jane, Doe, and sure, we'll give her computer science too. And just to be smart, we'll have Mike Booth. There we go. I'm making a name up on my head, and this guy will be fine arts. A little different. Okay. How did I get this? So right-click on the table and go to View Data. So right-click and go View Data, and then from there you can start entering your data in once you have your table done. Does anyone not have this? Okay, good, nice and easy. So now we have data And now we have a little table. We don't have a lot of data. We have a few pieces of data here. And I want to access this data from my program, right? I need to be able to connect to this data. And what I want to do is create a model for those people who are doing Node. Who's doing Node? Probably most of you, right? You're in the same program at the same time. So if you're doing Node, we create a model in Node, right? One of our things we do is we have a model class, right? It's exactly the same kind of idea with any other model view controller design pattern that we use. And Node.js uses kind of like a model view controller design pattern. It's a software design pattern that's been created and it's been used. It's old. It's not something new. It's new to web for the last 14 years or so, right? But it's not a new concept from a programming perspective, model view controller. It's a separation of concerns, right? We have our model that connects to our database. It's a class that represents our tables. We have our controller, which is the logic, right, for our model. And then we have our view, which is our user interface, right? That's what it is. And the controller kind of communicates almost like the middleman to connect with the model and then display stuff on the view. It's very similar here, but it's not exactly web, right? Database, but we need a model to connect to the database. We need some kind of way of identifying what this database is, right? What the table is in the database, and so on. So I'm going to be using something called Entity Framework, right? Which is a framework that gives us a few options to connect to the database. All right, so next step. I'm going to just kill this piece. I'm going to back here. I'm going to go back into my Solution Explorer, right? So by default, my project does not have the Entity Framework plugins attached. I have to get them through NuGet, right? However, what I want to do is a couple things. One, I want to create my models folder, right? A models folder that's going to house my a class that's going to represent the table in my database called students. Okay, so we made a students table. I'm going to make a folder called models. Inside there, I'm going to put a students class. But instead of me writing it by hand bombing it, I'm going to use Entity Framework to get all the data for me. Okay. So let's try this out. So first, I want to add a folder. So here's a new folder, and we're going to call this models, right? Our models folder. And inside my models folder, I'm going to, in order for me to do that, I'm going to right-click here, and I'm going to click Add. I'm going to click New Item, which is going to bring up my little New Item dialog in a second. On the left, I'm going to click Data. I'm going slow, so everyone keep up. Otherwise, you're going to lose me if you've never done this before. Okay, and if you notice, there's a bunch of options. The one I want is the one that's at the top, this one, right? ADO.NET Entity Data Model, this one, okay? And on the bottom, I don't want to just leave it as Model 1. That doesn't make any sense. It's got to be a context that I'm using, all right? So let's say, for example, I'm connecting to my database, and my database is all about the school, some kind of university or college, right? Let's just call this the college context, right? It's just a context. It's almost like, it's not the college model necessarily, because I'm going to have several different models in there, but it'll be something to do with the context that almost like the container that contains everything else, right? So I'm going to call this the college. You can call it whatever you like. If I was going to make a store, like an e-commerce site on the web, I might call it store context, right? Because I'll have several tables, several things I want to access on the store. For example, maybe if I'm selling albums, you know, as an example of music albums or whatever, I'll have albums, artists, genre, and all those might be tables in the database. But it's still going to be part of my store context, right? So same thing here. If I'm in my college, I'm going to have students, I'm going to have courses, I'm going to have other tables, and I want to access those things. Right now, I only have students, and we're going to go back and modify that in a bit. College context. All right, so here we are with ADO.NET. I'm going to click Add. Hopefully, you guys are with me. Now, I have some options. So Entity Framework, what is it? Why are we using it? Well, here's what Entity Framework does for us. For the majority of the things that we do, 99% of the time, when you have creating an application or you're making a website, the database already exists. Somebody has put the database together, and you're just linking to the data. Sometimes we make our own, but more often than not, the database exists, and we're there to modify a website or add features to an application to connect to the database that already exists in the real world. So when you actually go up work somewhere, you have to be able to connect to it. Now, Entity Framework makes it very easy. There's a few ways to do this. If I didn't have a database and I wanted to create it, I could do it by creating my model class first. So for example, let's say I don't have my students table. I could make my own model class, create my a class for my students table, and then I could use something called empty code first model, right? And I could use that model, and it would create the database tables for me. Model out, make a UML diagram of what my model would look like. That's another option. Microsoft gives you the option of laying out your diagram for your database, right? And kind of deciding what each of the tables do, how they connect to each other, foreign keys. You can do all that kind of stuff without coding anything. And then from here, if you're data, that's another option. This one is becoming deprecated. As we go forward in time, we're not doing this as much. It's not as popular. Then the other two that are most popular, which is one, EF Designer from Database, where you have, it creates your design, the design canvas that gives you your model. So it shows you your UML diagram for your database. That's one. And then creates the classes in your models folder for you. And the other one that's more popular now is the code first from database, which is, it doesn't create any diagram for you, but it does look at the database and takes looks at those tables, the existing tables, and then maps out a class for you. Okay, so those are the four options. So the way to think about this, and I'm going to go over Entity Framework again. Just overview right now. Okay, so you understand the flow of things. Okay, that's what it is, because it's a big kind of framework. And when we get into it with COMP 2007 next semester, right? Sorry, 2 semesters from now in the summer, right? You'll have seen this, and then you'll remember. You'll go, oh yeah, Tom talked about this, this Entity Framework, because we're going to be using Entity Framework for COMP 2007 a lot. All right. Okay, so I'm going to use code first from database, but again, the ones I want you to remember is I could use something from a database that already exists, code first from database, designer from database, or empty database model. Right? So this one I want, the fourth one. Next. Now it's going to ask me for my connection. All right? Now this is where you have to remember your connection. Notice that it says form 1, MDF. Yes. You might have something else altogether, right? Like a little thing that says, what do you have? Like 0 and nothing in here, right? Beautiful. That's what it should be. I have this because I fool around a lot with my stuff. You should have nothing, right? Now, what I want to do is click New Connection, right? Now, there's when you click on New Connection, right? You may not get this. You may get this first, all right? And that's okay. This one is for a database file, an actual file that lives in your application. We don't want that one. We want to use this one, right? The server, the first one, okay? Click OK, and then it's going to bring up the server name. Remember what the server name was? Do you remember it? You don't remember, right? And you don't remember because, okay. Again, no, you want this one. You want this, right? Not this database file, you want this, right? Okay. And then when you click onto it, you'll have this, it'll come up. And then under server name, you don't remember what it is. And this is the problem. The problem is, what's the server name? I told you what it was, right? Do you remember? So let's try this out. Local DB, right? Remember I told you about this? MS SQL local DB, right? That's what it is. And if you can't remember, you guys can pause. Stay where you are right now, and I'll go back and show you how to get it. So I forget what it is, right? Well, look, it's right here, right? But you can always get it from, I'm going to start this over again in a second. You can always pull up this. This is a nice way to do it. So pull up your SQL Server Object Explorer. You can scroll up to the top where you have your path. You don't need all of it, just up to here, right? And then you can do it again. So right click, I'm going to add, for those people who missed it the first time, new item, data, ADO.NET Entity Data Model, changes to college, context, click add. It's going to take you here. I'm going to choose code first from database, next. And then from here, I'm going to click new connection. And now I have right here what I need, right? So which is local DB. It's hard to remember, right? Backslash, and then MS SQL local DB, right? Now, if I'm using Windows authentication, it's cool. If you have some other thing in here, like for example, SQL Server authentication, that's wrong, because that means you need a password, username and password. And there is no username and password for your local server by default. Okay, so we have this. Now, in order for you to know that it's correct, you need to be able to pull this down. If you get a long list of stuff here, then you're good, right? So I'm going to use COMP1004. That's the one I made. You're going to choose the one that makes sense for you. Please do not click refresh, okay? And please do not try and search for it. It will go on and on forever, and it may not work. So if someone clicked refresh, you may have clicked refresh thinking you're smart, right? It's okay. You have to deal with it now, right? Just say it, right? So I also want to test my connection. You can see that I got my connection succeeded, right? And again, all I'm doing is I'm saying connect to this database server. That's just the name of the database server. It's not the database. The database is down here, right? I could also attach a database file, right? So I could also, if I had a database file that's in here, I could have attached a database file, and it would be run on the server. Okay, I don't have such a thing right now. Okay, let's click OK. Now, it gives me my path. Your path and my path will be different because I'm running a VM, right? You are not. So your path will show something that makes sense for you. Don't change this. Don't worry about what this says, okay? Down here, though, we want to change this. This is the one part we want to change. Notice that it's going to generate something called app.config, right? Application configuration is what this file is going to be, all right? And it says college context. I don't want to call it college context. The app.config file is going to tell us how to connect to the database. So therefore, let's just call it college connection, all right? And click next. Now, if we did everything correct, yes? I don't know why it would be. We'll come and do it at the break, all right? Because there's a bunch of steps here, guys, and like you see, it's not an easy process just to set all this stuff up, right? But once we do it the first time, the second time, third time, we're gonna do it every single time. You see it lots of times, you're gonna be fine, right? So again, I was here. Instead of college context, I call this college connection. For those people who missed that, and click next. Now, notice that I have this little pull down over here that allows me to choose my tables, and there's only one, students, right? If you don't see the students table, something wrong, right? Something wrong with your stuff, right? I'm going to click finish now. Notice also it says pluralize or singularize generated object names. What this is going to do is going to create a class that says student. All right, and if you look on the right, under models, it's doing its business. It's downloading and installing Entity Framework. That's what this is doing right now. That's why it's spinning, right? So it's going out to the web with something called NuGet Package Manager. It's going to grab everything I need, right? Install all the packages I require for my project, right? And inside models, it's going to include two classes. My college context class, which defines the connection to my database and all of the tables that are inside of it, right? As well as their relationship to each other, right? And my student class, which is my model for my student table. Okay, I'm just going to unpin this one. And let's take a look at my context. This is the context. Notice that I have the name of my connection, which is college connection, right in here. Also, I have something called a DB set, right? Which is a list of students. That's what it is. Okay? But it's of type student. In order for me to get this type student, it refers to this class student, which is right here. Let's take a look at what the class student looks like. This has all been generated for me. Hey, this looks, kind of, I don't know, it's like a deja vu. It looks exactly like my table, right? Pretty much. In some ways, right? Here's my student ID. Notice it's an integer. I have a getter and setter for this. I also noticed that there's these little square brackets, right? Square brackets from a C# perspective, I want you to think about these things as annotations or filters, if you will, right? If I put these these words, these keywords in square brackets over a property like this, it means that I want to modify the property so that this property here is required, right? As part of my model. Same thing with string length, 50. So it says that the length of my string can't be greater than 50, right? So when I do validation, it's all built into the model for me. All right, so for now, I want you just to, you may not understand everything, it's okay, right? I just want you to think of this. My model class is just a class. If you know classes, that's what this is. Right now it has a bunch of properties. Each property is the name of the field, right? A field that's inside my table. Okay, so starting with my student ID. Things to note, right, in order for this to work properly. My student ID itself has to have either ID in it, right? Something like that. Lowercase or uppercase. Has to have an ID somewhere in it. That's like the key, the primary key for the table has to have ID in it. If it doesn't, Entity Framework won't know what to do. So table without ID somehow, which you can do, like some kind of hash or something like that, it wouldn't detect you. You'd have to actually put another one of these in here that says key, like this. So I don't have to do this right now, but I'd have to be something like key in there, right? That identifies the key, that this is the primary key. I don't have to do that right now because Microsoft has delightfully done it all for me. Yeah, because you chose the wrong one. Well, we'll go back and do it again. Don't worry. This won't be the first and last time you see this kind of stuff. Yes. You wouldn't. That's the answer. Once you change your class, if you change your class here, right, and you try and connect to the database table, it'll fail because this has to be mapped exactly. Both have to be identical. The database table itself on the database. Then you'd have to do this again, or you have to modify your class manually. One of the two. It has to match whatever is in the table. Has to match the way your class looks. So if you have extra fields in your table, all the fields have to be listed here. Yes.
Can you stay there just as a reminder?
If you like, it's not going to hurt you. Okay. But these are the ones that we have here. Okay. So notice that we also have this other one down here that doesn't have required because remember I allowed this to be null. Right? In the database table, I said this one you can make it blank, but the rest they have to be required. Okay. Are we all good with this so far? Anyone not good with this? Because we're going to move pretty fast. Yes. Oh, because you have still the same issue, right? All right. I'm going to move one step more than this to kind of show what we've got here. So first of all, let's just close some of these things down, right? Well, I'm still got a form and there's nothing on it right now. I just got this thing, this models folder. Inside my models folder, I have a couple of these. The other thing that it also generated was an app.config file. Here's my app.config file. If I double click on my app.config, you're going to see that inside here, it has a couple things. One, Entity Framework is listed inside my app.config file. Also, I have something called a section for connection strings. My app.config file is an XML file that really kind of describes to my Windows Forms application, right, how I'm configuring my program. Okay, and one of the configuration details is this connection string that tells me how to connect to the database right here. Okay. If I was going to connect to Azure with a database that was on the cloud, I would just change my connection string. Now, when I say I would just, it's not just I would just. There's a few adjustments you have to make too to the connection string, right? But truly, that's almost what you need to do. So your connection string with the string of how you connect to the database, where the database is, and then your provider name is also required. Those two things, right? In an example where I'm connecting to a database on the web, then this would be modified so that the path is correct. The URL for the database and other metadata is also put inside of your connection string. Okay, for now, it's all been generated for us, nicey. Remember, this is rapid application development. We don't have to think about it too much, right? But this is what this app config thing is. Okay, now connections to the database. For example, I had a database server that also had, I wanted to log in and log out, and I wanted to do security with my database, right? I may have to make another connection just for the security part, right? I could have as many connections as I like to the same database or to different databases that give me access to different tables, right? So I can access that data. I just want you to know that. We're going to go back here and review again. All right, so right now we don't have anything, right? But we need some way of accessing the data in the database, displaying it here. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with a data grid view, right? If I go to Toolbox, and if I pin it, and if I scroll down, there's an area that says Data. Here's Data. And there's a couple ways I can connect to the database. One way is I can pull in a data grid view, right? There it is. So my data grid view says, hey, what's the data source, right? Do I have a data source right now, right? Yes, I do. I have Entity Framework, right? There is a poor way, a poor man's way, I'll say, of connecting to the database. I'm just putting it out there, right? Where if I don't have a database, a data source, I can add a project data source to this. We're going to do this later on as an alternate, right? For now, we're going to leave this as blank. So it's just all it is right now is a container, this data grid view, right? Where I can display a list of rows and columns related to my database, right? That's all it is right now. And I can make this as big as I like. Okay? And in here, I can also specify, if I had access to looking at this, I could also specify things like I could edit my columns, I can add columns, I can add rows, I can enable adding, editing, and deleting, the whole CRUD functionality. I can do all that here. But I want to name this thing correctly because I want to access this thing. And also, we haven't really done much with my form. Let's just call this like the student list form, right? So let's rename the form, and then we'll take a short break. And we'll go rename, and we'll say student list form, right? That kind of renames, asks you if you want to rename the form. We say yes. And that does the cascade of refactoring the form so it has all the proper namespaces and class names. Okay, now that that's done and we've renamed the form, I want to rename this thing, right? So I'm going to bring up my properties. Instead of data grid view 1, we're going to call this the students data grid view. Okay, so now we have a way of accessing the table, the actual object. And what I want to do is I want to have access to this thing, right? Now here's the thing, if I double click on this, what will it give me, right? One thing I should probably do is also change the name of the form up here, the actual on the title bar. So we'll change this thing to students list, the students list. And if I double click on this data grid view, we're going to get this. Notice that I double clicked on the student grid view. I got this, and this isn't what I want. It says cell content click. That doesn't do anything for me, right? So double clicking is going to do the wrong thing. It's putting it out there, right? Because it means like I've clicked on it somehow. I'm going to access it with my button. That's what I'm treating it like a button. It's not a button, right? So I can't do it this way. That's not going to do. So let's go and remove that. And just as a reminder, for people who forgot over the break, you can go in here under the lightning bolt, which is all the event. This is the event list. And we're going to go in here where it says student data grid view. And we're just going to erase this part. You could do that, and if you like, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, just putting it out there. So if you can try it, if it works for you, I love it. All right, so we're trying to not to be stressed here. Okay, so this isn't the way to do it. What about the form itself? So here's what I want to do. When the form loads, here. So again, let's hear the problem. When here's call it my user story. As a user, I should be able to see the list of students when the form loads, right? That's kind of, the user story. So if I double click on the form, it's going to give me my form load event, right? And this is where I want to load the data from my database, right? Okay, but we don't have anything that tells us how to connect to the database or entity framework or anything in here whatsoever, right? So I think this is the thing we're missing, right? But I want to do something almost like I want to get students. That's what I want to I want to create a method because I want to do it in my form load. I want to make a method that kind of says get students. Let's do that. So I'll say, I don't know, I have a method that's called get students. Okay, now it doesn't exist, right? But the great thing is Microsoft says, if it doesn't exist, we'll create it for you, right? It says one of the things we can do is we can say, hey, this doesn't exist in the current context. What's a fix for this thing? You know, can I create this thing for myself? Extract the method for myself, right? It says generate method student list form get students, and that's what I want to do, right? So there's my generated method. Did you see how I did that? Kind of detailed that before, but let me go back and do it again. So undo, and I got this little underline, right, that shows me that there's a problem, and there's a little light bulb here, and if I kind of pull down the light bulb, it says generate method student list form get students, yeah? Control dot, yeah, I did that too, first, right? But if you click on this, I'm just going to show it 2 different ways. Now I got this non-implemented thing. I want to take this away. So in here, what I want to do is I want to connect to the database. That's what I want to do. I want to connect to the database. And now where is my model? I need to be able to make a connection to the database, and it's all inside my models folder. Can I see everything in this current context? Can I access my models folder from the root namespace? What do you think? So the root namespace, for people who are confused and you're looking at me with confusion in your eyes, is COMP1004 F2016 lesson 8. Can I access it from this namespace, from this root level? The answer is no, you cannot, Tom. Right? Why? Because my models, my classes are inside of a folder. I want you to think about this from a Java perspective as a package, right? My package is inside of a folder. I have to insert or import my package in order for me to have access to that folder, right? So how do I do that? I use using statements, right? Using statements add in the namespace that I want. And the one that I want to have access to is using name of my namespace, which is COMP1004 blah, 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 dot models, right? Now I have access to everything that's inside of my models folder. Okay? Yes?
So these spaces, Java, using
The equivalent. In C++, it would be import, right? So, or in PHP, as an example, we use import statements too, right? You forgot. Okay, so let's move on. So, so again, I'm going to do this, and what I want to do is I want to create a way of accessing my database, right? So I need to create that connection. That's what I want to do next. And in order for us to do this, let's take a short break. I think it's a great place to stop because I think we've done a lot. And I'm going to go and fix your problem because otherwise I'm going to keep running forward and you're just going to be lost, right? So anyone has problems after this, please specify and I'll come over to you and help you out so we can all get on the same page. For those people who need coffee, now is the time to go get it if it's still open, right? And then we'll come back and I'll make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you.